Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Against the Odds. So last week on our Against the Odds poll, we had a second chance poll, and Muraganda Petroglyphs came out on top by a pretty wide margin. My theory is, y'all thought I was going to butcher the name, but I spent the weekend practicing, and I think I might be saying it close to right, so sorry about that. Anyway, that means this week we're heading to Modern to play a deck built around this crazy green enchantment. I'm calling it Muraganda Tokens, but I think this deck is actually pretty interesting. So, Muraganda Petroglyphs is itself a enchantment. It's kind of an anthem, but it has a really weird downside. It only gives its benefits, which is +2/+2 to creatures with no abilities. So I actually had to read into this a little bit because I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. I thought, oh, maybe this means like First Strike and Vigilance, abilities that actually affect the game. Nope. Abilities, as far as Muraganda Petroglyphs is concerned, is any text, essentially, other than flavor text on the card. So it could have an enter the battlefield ability. It could be a Tarmogoyf, which is essentially a vanilla creature. It just gets bigger based on the graveyard. Any rules text on the card is an ability, which means Muraganda Petroglyphs doesn't do anything. So with that in mind, there's pretty much 3 different possibilities for building Muraganda Petroglyphs. Number 1 is to build vanilla creature.deck. I looked into this. There are not a lot of good vanilla creatures. You'd be playing like Savannah Lions, Watchwolves, Woolly Thoctors, things like that, and then trying to make them bigger with Muraganda Petroglyphs. The problem with that plan is those creatures are already big. If you're a vanilla creature and you're somewhat playable, you're already kind of above the curve for your converted mana cost, so making a Woolly Thoctor into a 7/6 instead of a 5/4 isn't that much different than having a 5/4 Woolly Thoctor, because the problem with Woolly Thoctor isn't that it's not big enough, it's that it's going to get chumped or it's going to get killed. Muraganda Petroglyphs doesn't really solve that. So I crossed that one off the list pretty quickly. Option 2 is a morph deck, and I actually looked into this one a lot. I almost built this one, I put it together, but I couldn't get it quite right. Basically, morphs are creatures with no abilities when you play them face down, and then we could flip them around to get their ability. So I looked into this. The problem I found was if you play morph.deck, everything costs 3, and playing 3 mana cards over and over and over and having that be your whole curve isn't a really good way to win in Modern. So we ended up with a token deck, and I'm super excited for this. So what Muraganda Petroglyphs wants is a lot of creatures on the battlefield. The more creatures you have, the more creatures you have getting +2/+2. So we have this vanilla token deck, essentially, and the big finishers, the combo, I guess, is Conqueror's Pledge and then Increasing Devotion as a backup. So if we can play Muraganda Petroglyphs on turn 4, or maybe on turn 3 with a bit of ramp, like a Birds of Paradise or something, and then follow that up with Conqueror's Pledge, we're getting 18 power and toughness split across 6 bodies for only 5 mana. That is an insane Magic card. Even in Modern, if you just had a card that made 18 power and toughness, even vanilla power and toughness split across all those bodies, that would be a playable card. That is a very, very powerful effect. So that's what we're trying to do. Increasing Devotion, kind of a backup, only get 5 bodies, but it still works. 15 power and toughness for 5 mana, not bad. We also have some early game token makers, so Servo Exhibition, Raise the Alarm, and remember, we can't play Lingering Souls. We can't play any creatures with abilities, and that includes tokens as well, so we can't have creatures, tokens with flying, or trample, or anything like that, so we have to go vanilla with our tokens, but Servo Exhibition, Raise the Alarm, each make 2 1/1s, which become 2 3/3s with Muraganda Petroglyphs, and then Promise of Bree is actually super sweet. It kind of gives us a bit of protection from removal, and it just makes a ton of tokens. Our opponent is eventually going to have to block our stuff so they don't die, and then we get 4 1/1 colorless spirits, and those, if they're getting pumped by Petroglyphs, are going to be 3/3s, which means 12 power and toughness for 3 mana. So basically, all of these cards become incredibly above the curve when we have a Muraganda Petroglyphs. We also have some Planeswalkers, which kind of do double duty. They are backup copies of Muraganda Petroglyphs, And they are also token makers. So with Nissa, we can make a plant. It becomes a 2/3. Gideon makes a 2/2, which is a 4/4 with Petroglyphs. But they also both have the ability to pump our tokens. So we can tick down Nissa if we don't have a Petroglyphs and put +1/+1 counters on all our random servos and tokens from Conqueror's Pledge and all that stuff. Gideon, same thing. We can Anthem it, also beat down with it. And speaking of backup plans, when we don't have the Petroglyphs, we got Ganen E Township in the mana base. Almost a free roll in the late game. We can just activate it, Anthem up our team, and it's very good in our deck. When you have a go wide deck, being able to put a +1/+1 counter on everything with a land is just such a big ability. As far as the rest of the deck, pretty simple. Birds of Paradise and Noble Hierarch don't work with our Petroglyphs. They have abilities. Their abilities are adding mana, but they're very important to our deck. So we can play one of these on turn 1, which gets us to 3 mana. On turn 2, which means Nissa and Promise of Moonri, and then that gets us to 4 mana on turn 3, which is where Petroglyphs is, and then 5 mana on turn 4, which is where our big, huge token producers are that just close out the game. And that's kind of the nut draw of our deck, is just to have that curve. Cast a Conqueror's Pledge, Increasing Devotion on turn 4 with the Petroglyphs out, and that should be enough to end the game against most decks. And then just Path to Exile is a bit of removal, a way to interact with the opponent. The rest of the mana base, pretty straightforward. We have a bunch of fetch lands, Temple Gardens to fetch out, some basic lands, Razorverge Thickets as early game untap sources, and Ghost Quarters to deal with Tron. And there is a lot of colorless lands. We got 3 townships, 2 Ghost Quarters. Thankfully, we have the Birds of Paradise, we have the Noble Hierarch, which ups our colored source count, so I think we can get away with being a little greedy with the colorless sources. In the sideboard, Grafdigger's Cage, Relic to fight against graveyard decks. Grafdigger's Cage is becoming better now that Collective Company decks with the new Counters Company, the Vizier Druid combo deck is becoming so popular. So a little bit of upside there, even though it's not as good of just straightforward graveyard hate as some other graveyard hate cards. Blessed Alliance Timely Enforcements for aggro decks. Timely is a little weird. The life gain is nice, but since we make so many tokens, we're not always going to be able to get the tokens out of it. But it's still fine. Ghost Quarter comes in against Tron, so we can go down a couple more colored mana sources for more Ghost Quarters. Leyline is our main hope against combo, which is probably one of our worst matchups. Stony Silence for Tron for Affinity, and then Heroic Intervention, just a one-of, but it's a way we can save our entire team from something like Ratchet Bomb or Engineered Explosives, which are 2 cards that would be super good against us. Those are 2 of the cards we're most scared of, while hardcore Wraths, like real Wraths, like Wrath of God, Damnation, aren't especially heavily played in Modern. A lot of decks do have Ratchet Bomb, Engineered Explosives, and tokens are very susceptible to that. So it's a way we just make all of our stuff indestructible, fizzle one of those for only 2 mana. And that is Muraganda tokens for Modern, and that's our Against the Odds deck for this week. So is this going to work? I don't know. There is a big downside to Petroglyphs, and that is we have to play vanilla creatures, which means we can't block things with flying. It means we don't have trample. All we can do is make a lot of really big creatures. So if making a lot of really big creatures is good enough, and hopefully it will be, we should be able to win some games. The upside is we're going to be really good at clogging up the ground. We're not especially worried about a bunch of Tarmogoyfs, even Death Shadows, stuff like that, because we can just chump for so long with this deck. We have so many token producers, and then Petroglyphs can come down and just steal games. Our opponent is not going to expect Petroglyphs. They're going to see, oh, you got a bunch of 1/1s, that's cute, and then all of a sudden we untap, play a Petroglyphs, they all become 3/3s, we swing with like 7 of these Conqueror Pledge and Raise the Alarm and Servo Exhibition tokens, and just kill our opponent out of nowhere. So I think there's some sweet free win value thanks to Petroglyphs itself. So I don't know, I'm excited to try it out. It looks pretty janky, but maybe it can work. So anyway, that's our Against the Odds deck for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, take a second and click that like button down below. It's a great way to help support the channel for free, and you can find the next video in the playlist right here.